So I want to now get the A in our
Yes.
STEM acronym. And one of the so fascinating for me is that you start to immediately say it's not A as in arts in a general generic term.
Yep.
You talk about A as representing aesthetics, ancestry, and culture. Can you talk about that a little bit as we dive into that part of the link?
Yeah, the world was initially very hesitant to go from STEM to STEAM. What are you going to throw at it next? But I think we've gotten to the point where people understand that the arts in many ways become a driver, or at least a motivator, or at least a catalyst, or can be a catalyst for young folks' engagement in STEM. But I think that even when we think about the arts and STEM to STEAM, it's always a very particular notion of art, right? Like if the kids draw, then we can, if they draw a cell, then they're engaging in STEAM, or and I think it's a very simplistic way of looking at the A in STEAM. And so, I write about expanding A to include aesthetics. What you see and how you see it is this attention to detail, the ability to be able to observe a phenomena and see what the intricacies are in the thing that's been created, an appreciation for things that that are beautiful, and trying to make sense of why they get there. And I think if we expand out the A in STEAM to not just be art, but aesthetics,
yes.
The key observation and analysis and reflection tools that are necessary to engage in the aesthetic enterprise. And I think it also allows us to go beyond just like regular art, but like when you think about aesthetics, you're thinking about textiles and you're thinking about fashion, and all of a sudden you expand out the mechanisms through which we can engage in STEM. So I really believe that the A should not just be arts, but it should be art and culture, so that it's the culture that is produced by certain populations and the art in that. So when you make it art and culture, you're more democratic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you include aesthetics, then you have a new dimension that's triggered, a new sensibility that's awakened. And then also ancestry, yes. Where folks come from, how they got to where they were, what's in their lineage. And so I think that if we expand the A to be arts and culture, aesthetics, and ancestry, we have new pathways to get young folks to be engaged in science and tech, engineering, and math.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I'm all about the expansion of the A to get more folks engaged.
And there's language that's associated with that as well. So when we're starting to think about the forms of how it's not just sort of on the production side, what it is that we're going to be creating in terms of sharing our solutions or sort of describing our prototypes and why it's going to revolutionize a particular problem or issue. Right. It's also about seeing the aesthetics. And so the notion of the intricacies and the beauty of the braiding, as the example that we were talking about in an earlier part of the interview. I mean, that to me is, there's a level of attention to detail, but also wonderment and awe that's associated with that.
Oh, absolutely. I think about all the technological devices that are now currently a part of our existence, right? Yeah. The moving from a computer that was the size of the room I'm in right now into our phone. Look at the way that Apple revolutionized what technology looks like, because it was able to strike the imagination and people wanted to be beautiful and to be sleek. And then the folks who were working in technology had to make sure that the pieces were smaller and had to find ways to make it fit. And there's a beauty in the inner workings of a phenomenon. And I haven't talked enough here about engineering, which I think is a really strong piece of this. I mean, you cannot be an engineer unless you have an appreciation for fine detail, for calculation, and for aesthetics and how it looks. And so I think that, in the book I also write about maker culture, those who make things on their own, just out of a natural sort of like desire to be able to do so, are always concerned with the intricate and fine details, and they activate their scientific and mathematical minds because of their attention to the aesthetic details.
Yeah.
And so, and that should be translated into how we teach, right?
Well, so
we can't relegate this to like, oh, it's just the folks who do that.
Right.
No. This is what we need to do in classrooms with young people.
What is so fascinating too, Chris, is that when you started to bring up the engineering and the making culture, into the conversation right now, there's also language that comes with that too. And so it may not be, terms that you need to be acclimated or fluent in. It's the way we connect and think and work together. So language as in humanity, human connections.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because there are so many beautiful moments in the book, whether it's Down City Design, the Renewable Energy Innovation Hub, Green Cake, the power of starting to see how we think and work and are interdependent in our designs.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the things I wanted to do in the book is, like, I didn't want to just tell my story, which I do. And I didn't want to just tell teachers what to do, which I did. I also wanted to offer some exemplars and some, and like, there are folks in the world doing really cool science and math stuff right now. Like, Jeff, I did a profile on this guy, Jeff Henderson, who's a sneaker designer, right? Who was an engineer by training. And like, I just, for me, it's, to democratize STEM also means to be able to expand out who we see as a scientist and mathematician. And to connect to the people behind those things. I think what we don't do enough of in schools is introduce young people to cool scientists and mathematicians that are doing really fly stuff right now, right? And not only are they doing really cool things, but they speak your language, and they're concerned with things that are in the moment, and they're using like high impact, high intensity, really, really powerful scientific and technological tools to do these things. So I write a story, and I write about Kenrick Alado McDowell, who works for Google Arts, and like the way that he is like equal parts like creative and philosopher and tech whiz all at once, and can use language that is relatable. I mean, that's the next frontier of engaging young folks in STEM. I think if we continue to describe these disciplines as only for the select few with highly technical jargonistic knowledge, we won't be able to sustain our society. And we think about the United States and its current rankings as far as the construction of really powerful ideas. It's off, like, tops. When it comes to the application of those complex ideas, it's little and it's minimal. And the reason is because the folks who actually created the ideas should have the belief that they can execute the technological aspects of those ideas, but they've been convinced through 13 years of school, 14 years of school, that they can't. And so something's got to give, and I hope I offer something to help us address those issues.